with the recent release of Vagabond Dogs Sometimes Always Monsters, the sequel to Always Sometimes Monsters, yeah, that's not going to be confusing at all. I figured I'd do a retrospective review of a game I really liked. Then I played the sequel and thought that, rather than do two separate reviews as I did for MechWarrior, to highlight the differences between the two, I'd review them both in the same video. Because I've a fair amount to say about both games, mostly good in one case, mostly bad in the other. As with all good stories, we'll start at the beginning, in 2015, with the release of a quirky little heralded game called Always Sometimes Monsters. Created by a two-man team using RPG Maker, it promised a game where there was no real right or wrong, only choices with consequences. You make the choices, and how you deal with the consequences is what matters. It's a curious system to implement. Story-wise, the game placed you in the shoes of an aspiring down-under-luck author who has just received an invite to your ex's wedding. It's taking place in a month on the other side of the country, and you have to trek across there. Also, your publisher is on their last nerve with you, and have essentially dropped you unless you can produce something for them within a month. So you have 30 days to turn your life around. Oh, and you start off the game by getting evicted. Great. So the eviction at the beginning introduces the core game mechanics, getting money and making choices. You'll be constantly on the grind for cash, obtaining more of it via a variety of means, from monotonous day jobs to helping out a private investigator to prize fighting. The game allows you to get through the days and progress as you see fit. In between your hustle for cash are the interactions with your friends and other important characters. Here, you'll begin to see the effects of your choices on others. Your DJ friend Darkef is trying to kick a drug habit that his on-off girlfriend is quite fond of and is eager for him to keep, which can lead to an OD. Your stint at a local newspaper results in an interview that could lead to a suicide or other people getting killed, or to a free ride to the next town, depending on a wide array of triggers. The grind to upgrade another friend's car so he can win a race can be skipped by simply opting to have the other guy's brakes cut, but this will result in him burning to death in front of his children. In one town, the backdrop of a strike in a shady local election leads to many sources of solving the situation. You could simply strike break, pick up your scab money and ignore the whole fucking thing, help rig the election for one or none of the candidates, help out an investigation into all of them, or take some time out to help the strikers shit on their supervisor's car from the roof of the factory. It's up to you. There's some real variety going on in the cities to help flesh out the game and really keep it interesting. Graphically, the game is okay. I mean, it was made in RPG Maker for fuck's sake, what are you expecting? Gameplay wise, it's as simplistic as it gets. You walk around and you have one button to interact with objects. The game is purely dependent on its story to get by, and it's a good thing then that it's a great little story. The dialogue is overly flowery at times, but on the whole it works quite well, and there's some funny little moments. The college flashbacks showing how you first met up with your true love are really well put together, and the bookending of the game with the hobo and the gunman in the alley is a fantastic mechanism. Special mention to the ending you get if you don't make it to the wedding in time. The hobo is asked why on earth he stopped an armed stranger in an alleyway just to tell him a story about some rando dicking around for a month. It was hilarious. The trouble with having a game that's so purely story-centric and focused on this one aspect is that any issues in it get highlighted massively. Namely, the game's outcome is heavily dependent on whether or not you win back your ex. There's no option to get over them or even to grow to resent them and say good riddance. I almost certainly resented mine in my playthrough. After spending the college years claiming Sam was creepy, they then encouraged me to sign a contract to cut Sam out of the publishing deal. They then wound up getting engaged to Sam less than a year after the breakup. Less than a fucking year. Bullets have left guns slower. Plus, their wedding vows contradicted a number of the college flashbacks you have, so a supposedly tender scene just left me shouting bullshit. In fact, I objected to the wedding quite a lot purely on the basis of that. Sam as well doesn't come in for a lot of sympathy either, although it's less of a necessary with them. It's heavily inferred that Sam spent most of college plagiarising your work, they don't back off when your ex first starts showing interest in you rather than them, and then having fully sharked your ex less than a year after the breakup, they send you an invite to the wedding just to rub your face in it. Even then, your presence makes them so insecure that they try to win big at the casino for the honeymoon, leading to you needing to bail them out or else they'll get killed for the debt. Also, they'll berate you for being a fuck-up, while they've got a gun to their head for something that is entirely their fault, and then gloat in your face while you hand over the journal, thus saving their life. For a game where living with and dealing with the consequences of your actions, it seems that no one else sees the lack of this as the source of all their woes, and none of them ever accept the consequences of their actions. Larry doesn't see how cutting Sam out of the publishing deal affected your output, even though you wrote with a team. He even rubs it right the fuck in by getting you a job, pulping the old slips for the novel you never gave him. Dark F is constantly worried to bits about relapsing, yet he keeps his girlfriend around, despite her actively trying to get him back on drugs for no other reason than she's not on them. Sam in particular sees nothing wrong in how they've acted throughout the whole ordeal, despite the fact it was their plagiarising of your college essay which directly led to your first kiss with your true love. All of this would be somewhat acceptable if you were given an option to call people out on their bullshit. Instead, you go through the game being constantly berated by a troop of hypocrites, even culminating in one important scene where your ex's parent goes through your journal and calls you out on all the stuff that you've done in the game up until then. And there's no option to justify any of it to them. Your only option is to say if you feel bad or not, even for the most trivial thing. If Viper ODs and you successfully blackmail the doctor into treating her, you'll get bitched out for it. But if you leave town without doing anything for her, you'll get bitched out for not doing anything as well. Even taking a temp job as a janitor for some cash is seen as a foul act to them, purely because the place is a strip club. Like, you're not doing anything immoral, you're not working as a dancer there or fucking anything, you're cleaning floors, and it's apparently too much for them. Even though they do come across as clearly overtly judgmental assholes, you again can't stand up for yourself in that way. When the narrative is so tightly the focus of the game, these little cracks are all the more highlighted due to there not being much else to focus on. Conversely, this also helps to highlight all the subtle, brilliant touches to the dialogue that is there. Play as a same-sex couple and the conversations in the flashback change to suit. Lots of the incidental dialogue and events will change depending on what your choices are as a character and in your relationship. There's lots of really great flavour text for every type of playthrough. A lot of people have commented on the incredibly wax lyrical method all the characters speak in, but it didn't bother me, to be honest. In fact, I know a fair few people who speak in vastly more wanky methods than the characters in Always Sometimes Monsters do. Also, while not a lot of your actions will come back to you, the few that do in some surprising and funny ways. An interview can lead to a suicide, a murder, or a free lift out of town for you. However, smash up a doctor's car to try and coerce the medical treatment from him, and your free ride will swiftly be cancelled, as your driver was set to borrow a car from his doctor friend. It's a really nice touch. In summary, Always Sometimes Monsters has lots of really nice ideas and a great narrative to drive the game. However, the limited amount of endings and the lack of repercussions for a lot of your actions do somewhat undermine the free narrative with consequences selling point of the game. Thankfully, these points don't often undermine the story and the characters too much, and some of the scenes can be genuinely moving. It's a game I usually recommend to everybody. The sequel, less so. The sequel, titled Sometimes Always Monsters, takes place sometime after the events of the first game. You've the love of your life by your side and a bestseller in the charts. You're put on a book tour with a selection of other writers, selected in the same way you chose your characters from the first game. You select a number of authors and or your spouse if you want, and set out across the country. The main threat comes from the emergence of rumours that you're a plagiarist and that you've not written any of the book you're supposedly famous for. You have to complete your new book, combat the rumours, and live your life over 5 different cities. The main selling point of Sometimes Always Monsters is the ability to import your save from the first game. Apparently there's a huge number of markers carried over into this game, and the sequel will seek to expound on most of them. This will also lead to a lot of unique encounters with characters you've met and interactions you've had being mentioned and commented on and so on. Style-wise, the sequel doesn't differ vastly from Always Sometimes Monsters. While the graphics have improved, the interface has been tweaked a wee bit, the game still looks and plays more or less the same. It's still made an RPG Maker after all. Now this isn't a bad thing, by the way. I'm firmly in the if it ain't broke don't fix it camp. I've no issue whatsoever with the bare minimum of tweaks to the game's fundamentals for the sequel. What I do have issues with is the game structure itself, in that there isn't any. The game right off the bat brings up a screen announcing that there will be no hand-holding whatsoever in this game. Your choices and actions will determine what experience you have and nothing else. Yours, as was indeed my impression of this, is to mean that the game will not guide you through any of the moral dilemmas that it's sure to throw at you. You make your choices and you deal with the fallout. That's it. And that's brilliant, in theory. Unfortunately, what it also means is that the game does not tell you anything at all. From city to city, you're just dropped off and left to it until the time to do the book reading. While this may make some sense in a game that's packed full of stuff to do and numerous people to do it with, in Sometimes Always Monsters, there's almost nothing. For all the obvious effort gone into making each of the cities distinct from one another, all bar one are virtual clones. They all have the same gyms, the same coffee shops, the same markets, the same drugstores, etc. And now, while this may be a subtle comment on the soulless cookie cutter society we live in, it's very obviously just a copy-paste technique to save the devs time in not having to fully design each store in each city. In looking for stuff to do and people to do it with, you're shit out of luck there as well. The authors you take with you have virtually no interactions with you outside of the one event you get to do with them, and then that's it. They do their book reading and then they just sit on the bus watching TV. It's impossible to form any sort of bond with them. Also, why do I have to do anything with them? Are they friends? Will there be any negative connotations for pissing them off or ignoring them? This is a game series where all choices matter after all. You also have to maintain your writing output as well. However, unlike the first game, the writing sections take up chunks of your day rather than being done at the end of every day, and you get to name each chapter. So you have a choice between locking yourself away in the back cabin, which was given to you specifically because you've written nothing for the tour, and ignoring what little content does happen, or trying to wring as much out of this game as possible and giving the novel a back seat. Now, seeing as how you suffered so greatly in the first game due to your non-delivery of material, I prioritised the writing sections over the exploration. Go watch a movie, go work out, take a shower, do a class, none of it was any interest to me, and reminded me hugely of the tedious work sections from the first game. So I avoided them wherever I could. During each visit, you can pick up one of your fellow authors to do a specific event with them, and, to give the game credit, they're the most interesting parts of the game. Actually, they're the only interesting parts of the game. From glowing clubbing to buying scalp tickets for a gig to joining in on one of the most awkward D&D plays I've ever seen, these events brought some light and background to the characters you've chosen to go on this trip with you. Too bad that after each one, it's just dropped and nothing more is mentioned about it. I should also point out that the authors themselves each have little vignettes with each other, and again, while these are very interesting and at times quite funny, they're dropped immediately with no further mention of them. Each 2-day stint ends with a book reading in the local bookstore, which again you can skip if you want. I'd recommend not doing that though. Not because of the mind-blowing pieces of narrative exposition or anything, it's just that they're one of the few interesting things you'll have to do on the tour, and skipping them seems a little pointless. They're good scenes, don't get me wrong, but there's absolutely not enough in them to warrant the build-up they get at the end of each city. The same goes for taking your partner along with you. They serve no purpose other than to deliver some truly cringeworthy sex lines and talk about themselves. Outside of the final scene, they add nothing to the tour experience, which is roughly 95% of the game. I suppose what really annoyed me about Sometimes Always Monsters is the pointlessness of everything. The prequel established a world in which you could expect all actions to have repercussions. Now, while it didn't exactly succeed in that a lot of the time, it did try to, and when it clicked, it really worked. Here, they've not even bothered attempting to connect any of the scenes at all. This is personified with the inclusion of a whole raft of life sim elements. You have to get dressed each day, wash, go to the bathroom, eat, wash dishes, shit. There's a stunning amount of counters for your actions in the games, from hygiene levels to the amount of fucking dogs you pet. And none of it matters. Literally none of it. There's no point to any of it. It doesn't serve to flesh out the story, it won't alter any character interaction with you unless you get to the extreme end of self-neglect, and even then, it's just a few lines of dialogue. It begs the question, when none of this matters, why include it in the game? It's just pointless filler. It's there to serve no other purpose than to pad out the gameplay. Most of the tasks in the city too are like this. Wandering around the desert across almost 100 screens of the same featureless sand makes no sense, isn't even remotely fun, and it adds nothing to the character or story development whatsoever. So why have it in there? Watching movies or TV is a little fun. All the films are completely awful and played straight for laughs. But again, whether you go alone or you take someone with you, there's no purpose to any of it, other than to waste time. All this ancillary content is meant to prop up and enhance the central tenets of the main events, not be the main events themselves. And while the central objective is clear, not much else around it is. How much do I have to write to finish the book? 100 pages? 200? 1,000? You can't end the book at any stage, you have to just keep ploughing on with it, or ignoring it if you want, until you're prompted with the ability to say that the book is finished in the final city. The entire rumour premise is completely wasted as well. I was expecting a constant mechanic where I'd be heckled and challenged at every book reading and have my answers thrown back at me in the finale. But nope, the rumours are mentioned at a grand total of about 4 times in my playthrough, and much like everything else in the game, it doesn't matter. It also suffers from the same lack of dissonance between the game content itself and the ending. It's one of the most deflating feelings to pore over loads of the choices you make, consider the effects those choices will have, only to have them tossed out the window at the very end. In the first game, the ending you got was solely decided by whether or not you won back your love, regardless of how realistic a prospect that was. Here, the ending of the game is solely decided by what 2 words you type in. Look, I'm not going to go into detail about the ending sequence, only that it did not fit the game flow at all and felt so incredibly rushed and threadbare. It's actually a bit ironic that this game should end up with an ending that seems so rushed when the rest of the game has a glacial pace to it and is bloated out to the gills with pointless filler. Sometimes Always Monsters was designed to be the opposite of the first game. Where the first game has you as a broke, loveless author, here you're given a huge chunk of cash and your love is by your side. The first game gives you a tight instruction and not a lot of time to complete it in. Here, you're basically just told to slob around. You're given days at a time to do whatever you want, and the request that you try and write a novel, please. The first game has you undermining elections or picking marijuana leaves in the different locales. Here, you're going to nightclubs, gigs, D&D sessions, and crashing in haunted houses, if you're lucky enough for those events to trigger. The first game gave your character limited speech options, but it really did seem like they had something to say. Here, your dialogue options are restricted to different flavours of yes, no, maybe, and don't know. Your main character has no soul anymore. The first game had you interacting with a small cast of colourful, if somewhat ridiculous characters. Here, you're given a small army of complete non-entities to blindly interact with for their token 2 responses. No one has any character. The first game gave a multitude of choices, some affecting the path of the game to varying degrees. Here, you're given an absolute ton of choices, with none of them affecting any part of the game outside of the few minutes they were made in. And I understand the decision the devs made. They went in the opposite direction to give you the flip side of the coin experience. Unfortunately, in attempting to flip everything on its head, they wound up flipping a good game into a bad one. Also, I have to state that the game was in no which way, shape or form finished when it was released. It was bugged up the arse, and as of this review being recorded, the game has been updated 10 times in the 3 weeks since it's dropped. And while the devs do deserve some praise for the level of feedback and for the speed of the patching that they're given to the online community, with a 6-year development period, wouldn't a better use of their time been a bit more QA? Rather than coding in doggy dance parties and alternative costumes for them, I'm not kidding there by the way, how about making sure that all the side events trigger correctly and that people can get through the fucking game? I refuse to believe that none of the bugs were noticed on launch, and the Bethesda level speed patching can only be viewed negatively as a result. To wrap the whole thing up, Always Sometimes Monsters is a flawed but excellent little game, with some really annoying elements but a superb narrative to keep you going through it. The freedom of choice and being the person you want to be is a good one, and its effects, although sometimes lacking on the environment, are really good. Sometimes Always Monsters is a flawed and tedious game with some really annoying elements forming the core gameplay, but with no narrative to drive any of it other than the occasional fun moment. The freedom of choice is seen as an end in and of itself, but without this choice affecting the environment, it's pointless having it. My advice is get the first game and try the second at your peril.